Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us at our last class of 2020. It's so exciting to have everybody here. It's really a great way that we've been able to offer classes to our community while we're not able to gather together. My name is Carrie. I am City Market's Assistant Outreach and Education Manager. I'm going to be kind of behind the scenes for this one. So if you have questions during this live stream, what you can do is type them into the question and answer box up top. You'll see a little sort of chat bubble type icon, and you can type your questions in there, and I'll be feeding them to our instructor as they come through. Again, we're really excited to have you. If you have any problems, shoot me an email. I'll see if I can, help you out with that. But again, put all those questions into the chat box, and I'm really excited to get started. So I'm going to turn things over to our instructor, Richard. If you are joining us late and you're just getting to this part, I'll put it in the announcements as well. You can hit the little live button down at the bottom near where the time bar is, and then I'll catch you up to where we are. So if you join us late, it does start you back at the beginning, but you can hit that little live button to catch up to where we are. Thanks so much, and I'll turn things over to Richard.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Richard Witting. I'm a chef, caterer, and I've studied anthropology with a focus on food, and I'm also a scholar of food history, or aspiring scholar of food history. I'm here tonight to talk to you about Hanukkah and its food traditions, and specifically the Latka and its history. I want to start by saying I myself am not Jewish, but I have been the chef for the last 3 years at Ohavi Zedek here in Burlington, and have had the privilege of working with the community there and the rabbi to learn a lot about Jewish food traditions and kosher rules and laws. And I've also gotten to work at Ruach Makom and Temple Sinai as well. So I'm hoping to share with you some of the things I've learned in my last few years. So with that, though, I did want to say that some of these things, Hanukkah and Latkes, they're not my family's food traditions. So I want to say if I misspeak or anything I say might not be the tradition as you learned it, I'm open to hearing more, and I apologize if in any way I might offend. So my goal here today as an anthropologist and historian is to give those new to Hanukkah and the Latka an overview of the story and a little bit about the history of the holiday. And then as a chef, my hope is for those who are familiar with Latka and Hanukkah and its food traditions, that I can teach you a bit more about latkes and how to problem shoot, or some of the variations that may come up. Hopefully towards the end too, I might be able to speak about some other additional international Jewish food traditions. Let's see. We provided you with recipes. I'll be going over just the first one, the first two, maybe the third if we have time, and the rest of them there are for you to look at on your own if you're looking for new ideas. But I won't be going over them tonight. This is also the last day of Hanukkah, so apologies if you were hoping to put this to use this year for your celebrations. But any of these things, you can make any time of the year, hopefully, so it might be worthwhile to learn. Let's see. So with that, I would like to show you the first thing I've come across in my research.
We're going to shut off the light. Don't worry, it's not your screen.
So what I have here is a cup of very strong black tea. My suggestion is lapsang, which is I think one part of the blend that is Russian caravan. So this is a Jewish Russian tradition where you take a hot cup of tea, you set over it a spoon, and in that spoon I've placed, in this case, a cherry brandy and a piece, a sugar cube. So as the alcohol lights from it, the sugar cube begins to melt and to burn, and the alcohol cooks off. So in this tradition, you would normally, in normal times, right, be able to gather a lot of people together, and you would all have one of these set in front of you. And depending on your preference for alcoholic or not drinks, you could dump it at different times. But the tradition, as I learned it, is that you would be able to sing a song and then all together dump them. So I thought this was a very cool one. Hanukkah is often called the Festival of Lights. Is one of its names. For those who maybe aren't Jewish but have seen it or know a little bit about it, the menorah, the candle, the candelabra is often a symbol that you would recognize. Hanukkah is 8 days, and each of those days, one more candle is lit. And there's a couple of stories associated with Hanukkah. The primary one being, I'm going to go ahead and dump now this in here, extinguish it in the tea. I'd love to drink it, but I will be setting it aside. So the first story associated with Hanukkah is the story of the Revolt of the Maccabees. Specifically, so this took place in the year 168 BC. And at that time, it followed when Alexander the Great had sort of conquered across from Macedonia and Greece, the Persian Empire, and down into Egypt and the land of Israel in there. After he died, a series of successors attempted to take control of the empire. So in the year 168, I believe it's like 5 or 6 emperors down, this emperor of the Seleucid Empire, he was, when he came to the throne, he decided he was not going to be tolerant of other religions besides the Greek religions. So, the classic Greek pantheon of Zeus and such. And so he ordered that Judaism could not be practiced in Israel, and had his army invade, and they desecrated the Second Temple, which was the center of Jewish religion at the time. And his troops went so far as they erected a statue of Zeus in the temple, and desecrated it by slaughtering pigs, which, kosher pork is very frowned upon. This man, Judah Maccabee, him and his brothers and his father began a revolt against these conquerors, and over a course of 3 years, led a sort of guerrilla style battle against them and eventually drove them out. After that had happened, the temple was rededicated, and the time of the rededication also coincided, I believe, if I recall right, with the harvesting of the olive oil at the time, which was used in the candles to light them. So when they came to the temple, there was only one small bottle of oil that had been left undesecrated by the invaders, and it wasn't believed that it was going to be enough oil to last until the temple could be rededicated and the candle and new oil purified. So, but as it turned out, the miracle of the story was that each day when they went to refill it, the oil sort of somehow managed to last another day until the time in which the temple was rededicated. Let me grab a drink. There's one other story that is later also associated with Hanukkah, which is the story of Judith. And Judith historically took place earlier, but at a certain point, the two stories became associated with Hanukkah. And she was famous for her village, her city in Israel was being invaded at the time. This is before the story of the Maccabean Revolt. An Assyrian king had sent an army to conquer her city. and she was a widower, and she went out to the army and managed to sort of seduce the general of the army. And she fed him salted cheeses that made him really thirsty, and so he kept drinking more and more wine and became drunk. And when he became drunk, he eventually passed out, and she was able to behead him with his own sword. So yeah, sometime later, the two stories in from my readings in the Middle Ages sort of fused together into one. So these two food traditions tend to be associated with Hanukkah. So one is in representation of the oil that was so important to the miracle of the rededication. So frying and things that have been fried and oily foods are generally Hanukkah-related foods, and then also to often cheese and dairy-related things as well. So, having said all that, I'm now going to. Was there any questions over there?
Someone just said that a great idea would be to make latkes tomorrow for Hanukkah breakfast.
Oh yeah, Hanukkah brunch tomorrow would be awesome. So now I'm going to move over to the making of latkes and talk a little bit about that process. And then I'll come back a little bit later when we have that underway to talk about the history of the latke itself. So I'm assuming most of you have encountered or seen a latke and know what I'm talking about, but a latke in its simplest form is a potato pancake, a fried shredded potatoes. So the first thing for that, let's get my recipe. The first thing, of course, for that is potatoes themselves. Now, for this, the standard is to do either russets or Yukon Golds. I previously always did Yukon Golds, but this year I switched to doing russets, and I sort of greatly appreciated, actually, flavor-wise, what I found there. So the slight difference between them I find is often I go to Yukon Golds just because they are a very clean potato. I feel like I look at them, they don't have a tough skin. They don't tend to have bad spots or eyes when I find them at grocery stores. Versus russets like these ones I found here, there's parts that need to be trimmed or peeled off. So there's no reason to actually take off the skin unless you want a sort of lighter looking or cleaner product. But in my opinion, the skin is great, and you should leave it on, and you can save yourself time. But if you have old potatoes like these ones are to some degree, you will want to trim off any eyes or bad spots, which if they're really old potatoes, you might look at them and just say, I'm just going to go ahead and peel them all. There are alternatives to using potatoes. If you look around online, you can see anything from carrots to sweet potatoes, and most of them will work, and you can find ways. So the potato or the starch is the first thing, and then we're going on to the onion is the other sort of key part, and then binders, which will hold it together when it fries. So first thing I'm going to do here is, so I guess with grating it, I'm going to be using a food processor over here with a grater attachment, but you can always use a box grater. That's your preference. For a smaller amount, it's, I don't think it's that hard. Some people swear by the box graters because they put, a food processor is really, sort of whipping everything around, breaking it up. So you'll get less threadiness to the potatoes when you do it in a processor compared to by a box grater. It's just more of a gentle process. I'm going to use the food processor because I've made a lot of these in this last week, and I don't feel like grating by hand. So what I'm doing here is I'm just cutting them small enough to fit through the processor's window or feed tube. There we go. That's the word. And
so for anybody just joining us late, you can hit that live button them down near the bottom to catch up. And if you have questions, you can type them into the little chat bubble Q&A icon at the top.
So, another thing I'd throw in is, just in the start while I'm cleaning these up a little bit, this isn't a recipe where I think you have to be extremely precise. The variations that you'll see if you look around and preferences that people have with latkes, you know, you can go a little more, a little this to a pretty good extent with them, and still, you know, get something that's pretty good, if not, you know, if a little different. So that's the potatoes. I have here some onions. The onion ratio is pretty high in latkes, though they do exist with little or no onions as well. There very recently, just in the last few weeks, I believe, was a New York Times article with a latke recipe by the Jewish author Joan Nathan. And she was actually having dinner with a local chef, Nate Wade, of Misery Loves Company, who is now elsewhere. I don't recall where. And she had his latkes there and asked him how they were made. And having just done a lot of latkes, a lot of people have brought this article to my attention, so I want to tell you about it. What he does in it is a thing that I learned as hash browns, having worked in diners in my youth, which is where instead of grating a raw potato, you bake it until it's not completely cooked, but has been heated all the way through. So it's cooked, but it would still taste like you know, if you were trying to eat it, it wouldn't be quite there. It's still a hard, firm potato. But what that does is it makes the potato somewhat softer when you then grate it. And it also makes it so that it doesn't oxidize, which is a thing that you can have a strong opinion about, you know, whether it matters. But potatoes, I brought an example here. So potatoes, when you cut them, I'm sure you've probably seen it, as time goes by, they start to turn dark. So through this process, you know, I've cut these potatoes and already they're beginning to turn a little bit different color. And they, over time, will become a grayish color. So if it's going to take you a half an hour to do this and then fry them all, towards the end, your latkes aren't going to look golden. They're going to kind of look like a grayish brown, which I feel like does kind of affect the flavor. But I can't say that for certain. I mean, they're still going to be a good latke. You can still eat them. There's nothing wrong with it. But yeah, I don't know if I already showed you, but these are ones I graded earlier just to show you what, you know, just your average potato looks like after a while of being grated.
So still completely edible, just maybe not. Still
edible, yeah, just a little less pretty, yeah. Another thing I should throw in actually that I should have done with these, I mean, it's not too bad, but it'd probably be good to give them a rinse too, if your potatoes look like they've seen the dirt recently. So onions, I'm a big fan of onions in my latkes, and so what I'm doing here is I'm just cutting them similarly so that they can fit through the feed tube on the processor. And what I do is I just throw them in with my potatoes, and it kind of, I will sort of alternate, you know, grating one and then the other, and that will let me sort of skip a little bit of the mixing step. Some of these things like this, to me, you know, I add this step in because, you know, I recently made 450 latkes, so I had to make 90 pounds, and having them sort of ready to go without mixing them was a big help. But at home, it may not be as important here. But so I'm going to process now.
Yeah, I am going to hit mute on us while we're running the food processor, just because it is quite loud. So it's not true that I have muted the sound when Richard's actually going to hit the food processor. So give us just a second and you can watch and learn. All right, we're back. Good sound. Otherwise, that would have been really loud for everybody watching.
I do have another batch I gotta do, but.
Yep, so we'll mute again once we process it then. So yeah, I like the idea of sort of the onion alternating with the potato so that you don't have to just have a big pile of onion on top of your potato and then mix it all in. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna mute again. So we'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, we are back. We had someone comment in the chat that if you want to shred a large amount for the next day, you can shred and keep them in a bowl full of water, drain it the next day, and squeeze all the water out, and they will not darken.
Ah, nice.
So I guess it stops the oxygen from.
Yeah, I'm gonna real quick hand grate the rest of these. I can talk about that. So yeah, there's a few ways. If you also wanted to, like if you need to peel your potatoes, you can definitely peel them and then throw them into a bucket of water. That's the way we do it a lot in kitchens.
Does that affect the starchiness at all? Once you rinse off a lot more of the starch that way?
You do, yeah. You'll see the oftentimes sort of an advanced trick, which comes up later, is that the water that will drain off of this, there'll actually be a starch layer that forms in that water that you can then incorporate back in if you want. Some people also add in potato starch to the latkes, which adds a sort of crispierness to it. Should be good. Yeah. It's not at a heavy boil, right?
It's at least simmer.
Simmer. Great potatoes. I'll just work with that. Okay, so these are the potatoes and the onions, which I've now mixed together. So what begins happening is they start giving off water, lots and lots of liquid. And so this is one thing that there is some varying opinions on. You can leave more water in if you want. They will tend to fall apart a little bit and be a little softer, but it's not a must to get out all of the water. Some people claim it's better with it. You may need to add more binders later, but I'm going to go ahead and show you this because this is pretty standard. So I'm squeezing, this is cheesecloth. At home, if you have any type of cloth, like a t-shirt or anything that, usually I'd suggest something lighter in color and older so that it doesn't have dyes or anything still coming out of it, and has been either washed without laundry detergent, or you can just wash it or soak it by hand to get out any smells from that. You can use them to do this. So again, this isn't something where you have to really meticulously get every drop of water out. And
Wow, look how much water you are getting out of it.
right. Yeah, later on that water, you're sort of fighting against it to sort of crisp up your potato, your latkes. So yeah, if you see from that, Got this, which is maybe almost 2 or 3 cups of liquid.
Move the dish bottle.
So now we have our potato and onion mixture. I may adjust, you may see an adjustment of what I'm doing based on this, just because I'm leaving out some of the potatoes and onions. So I may decrease a few things.
Yeah, I always like to say when I send recipe handouts that I definitely want people to pay attention to the instructor as opposed to just looking at the recipe, because a lot of people cook by feel and by, sense, and so the recipes might not be exact.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that a lot of times, if you really want to learn how to do something well, you have to, I think with the recipe, you have to understand the variations of a little more, a little less, and sort of what transpires. So hoping to tell you a little bit of that as we go. My recipe that I've sent you here is pretty strong on onions, matzo meal, and egg. You could decrease all of those things to almost none. The matzah meal and the egg, those are binders. The matzah also will suck up additional liquid. So if you say didn't want to strain out as much water, you could add more matzah as a way to still bind it and dry it up a little bit. So
it's 6 o'clock, just let me know.
Okay. All right. So here's my matzah meal. A little bit out. So this matzah meal here, I just made myself. You can buy matzah in most grocery stores in the kosher section, and you can just break it up and put it in your food processor if you can't find the matzah meal. A thing I don't have in my recipe that a lot of people have, as I might have said before, is potato starch. I find it pretty hard to find potato starch, and I don't find it especially necessary. So. And then, let's see, eggs.
Could you do this without egg at all?
You could, yep,
okay.
Yep. Yeah, if you do it without egg, I suggest the other method I mentioned where you pre-bake your potato. Because if you think about like a baked potato, right, how that's squishy compared to a raw potato, that extra baking will allow you to sort of squish it together to make a patty that will hold together. But yeah, definitely can do it without the egg. Salt, a little bit of 1 tablespoon of salt. And then 2 tablespoons baking powder, 2 tablespoons baking powder. That might be a little high. I'd almost say I'd adjust that down a little bit to 1.5 maybe. And then black pepper. Black pepper is also optional. I've definitely seen recipes without it. Half a tablespoon.
Are you sick of latkes yet, or are you still excited about them every single day?
Well, I have to be honest, after making 420 of them the other day, I'm kind of sick of latkes for the year.
So it's a good thing. We'll finish out this week with the latke class, and then we'll be done.
Yep. Yeah, at a friend's house the other day. I did get a chance to make a latke that I just, she wasn't eating starchy vegetables. And I made one out of celeriac and, not parsnip, turnips. And it turned out pretty good flavor-wise. It was a little hard to bind it together, but yeah, I can definitely improvise. So there's a matzah, there is a latke mix. We'll wash my hands.
Awesome. So again, if people have questions, go ahead and type it in that question and answer box. I'm loving all the questions coming in so far.
So now this recipe I've given you is specifically one I use in what's sort of an unorthodox manner, which is I cook these latkes in the oven often. And the reason why I do that is because I'm making them in such quantities that you know, if you really need to get a lot of latkes done, doing them this oven method is going to just produce a lot more, a lot faster than frying them individually in pans. I think that frying them individually in the pans, you're generally going to get a better latke because you're more likely to, I think, be paying attention to what you're doing, being careful with each one. But it just takes, you know, you can't have 100 pans at one time that you're sort of juggling versus in the oven. So I'm going to show you a little bit of both. I'm going to start by doing the oven method, just so we can pop that in the oven and I can talk to you about it while it cooks. So these are the sort of standard half sheet tray you would see in a restaurant or professional kitchen. Any of them will work. The thicker tends to be better in my experience. Thinner pans or even older, oilier pans will tend to have, it's more likely that the bottom will burn. Also, another thing to be thoughtful with this method is, you know, how high the lip is, because we're going to be putting oil in this and to some degree almost frying in an oven pan. So it's mentioned on there, but be very careful, especially when you're removing this from the oven, that you don't go like this and the oil will splash. So for this, you could, for the oil, so oil is the next key part to talk about. The way I do it is a blended oil. So I do some amount of canola, vegetable, or sunflower oil, and then some amount of olive oil. I just eyeball it, and you know, maybe at most a quarter of the total that you're making is olive oil. I do this because I think olive oil adds good flavor, and you know, canola or vegetable oil doesn't add much flavor, but the smoke temperature that you get from it is better, meaning you can heat it more, it lasts longer before the oil itself will burn. So I feel like this gives it a good medium. If you look up other recipes for oven style latkes, some of them will say that you need to put this into the oven first to heat it with the oil, so you're almost creating like a fryer situation. I have not found that to be necessary. So I just go ahead and put the oil on right now cold, put the latkes in, and then put it in the oven. You know, the concern I think is that they're greasier, but I think they're oilier, but I think latkes are just oily is my experience. And you can, at the end of the process, there's things you can do to get them a little less oily if you feel like they are. So this is another thing that, depending on your pan is going to dictate sort of how much of this oil you need to put in there, but at least a good layer. So I think I just put about, I think that's probably a half cup. So this is at least coating it or a little taller. You can even go deeper than that if you feel like it. The oil will rise up as you put stuff in here, you know, to sort of displace it. And when it's thinner, it feels like it will cover more. So that usually is enough. So with forming your latkes, there's a few things here. So your preference may change depending on what you like, on how thick or thin a latke you want, or how big or small. If you have a thicker one, I mean, those will sort of change how you cook them a little bit. You may want to adjust a thicker latke. You might want to adjust down the temperature a little bit so that you're not burning the outside too much. So you don't have to measure this, but I usually aim for about a 3-ounce latke. I just know that because of using scales and kitchens for it. Another thing there's a variation is, do you want what essentially looks like a cake, right? Like a round, even cake disc like this, or a lot of people prefer the shreddy look, the crispy edges, yeah. Right? Where you kind of get this, you're not developing the edges, you're leaving the outside like that. That's often preferred by people. One of the challenges of the shreddy edge is that if it's going to be burning, it'll be those parts. So it sometimes makes it a little more challenging. Like I said, my recipe is a little bit more cakey, a little more for this style. Yukon Golds are much better for that threadiness, and then decreasing the egg and the matzah will let you get a shreddier, sort of lacy potato cake.
Someone had the question, can you process onions and potatoes in your food processor without using the chute and the grater attachment? But I think you'll just end up with kind of paste if you use the blade, right? You won't end up with kind of that texture that you're looking for. You won't get that texture, but you could, I am not experienced with it, but I believe in my readings, I found that there are ways to do it that's like a processed potato. I don't know quite if if it's still a latke at that point. I don't know. I think in that case, you might just want to look for a regular old grater, do it by hand. I do know another sort of pro tip I've read about is processing some amount, like if decreasing the egg and the matzah, the binders, and instead taking some amount of your latke mix and pureeing it, gets you like a wet mixture that can then sort of bind it itself. Someone else also wants to know, if you leave out the binder of the matzah meal, should you increase the eggs to bind it, or should you just stay the same? I think you could still do it without the matzah, and it would still bind. Essentially, the more you get, the less binder you have, the more fragile it is. So, it just might be that it falls apart as you cook it, but it's not impossible. You just might have to be more delicate with how you handle it when you flip or. Plus, increasing the eggs might get a little bit eggy, right? It would be like egg flavor. Yeah, it would be. I'd be interested to try that for sure. But for the person that commented, some people are looking for those crispy burnt edges. I feel that I get it. But at a certain point, like too burnt might be a little bit too much. But yeah, no, I'm all about the crispy. Yeah, totally. The crispy edges are a great thing to achieve if you can pull it off for sure. You just have to make sure that you're sort of thinking about the temperature so that you're getting it cooked on the inside sort of at the same time you're getting crispy edges. I would tend to think that you'd want a thinner. You'd want to press it down a little bit more to get a thinner latke if you're doing the crispy edges. Oh, another tip with this oven style is that I'm definitely patting down the tops to make the tops kind of level, because I'm going to do a flip later, so I don't want like a domed top that won't sit right. For the person that asked about nutritional yeast, I'm not sure that would work. Would that work as a binder? Someone's asking if you could use that as a binder. It's definitely going to change your flavor dramatically. Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't know if I would try and do that as a binder. Yeah, I think. I mean, certainly if you were looking for like a gluten-free alternative, gluten-free flour, or using, or if you don't have matzah, you can use flour as a binder too. That's what somebody else commented as well. They just use flour, it's lighter. Or optionally panko. I mean, you can get more creative, do crackers, breadcrumbs. Right.
and they would all do it. I'm not sure if the potato starch at all would help with binding. I kind of feel like it might a little bit. But yeah, I think if I was trying to bind without, I mean, when I was doing a Latka takeout last week from Temple Sinai, I did have a few gluten-free and vegans that I needed to make. And yeah, I did the thing where I pre-roasted the potato just because then it's sort of halfway to a mashed potato and you can just kind of get that without the, so let me wash my hands again.
Do another quick hand wash. Sorry, the hand wash things are out of you. But thanks for all these great questions and suggestions. Really awesome to hear how other people do it as well. Someone says the potato starch does seem to help soak up the moisture in their lactose. All right, so we're going to switch over to the other camera real quick. Going in the oven. What temperature do you have the oven set at?
In this case, I am aiming for 400,
Yep.
Which is on the higher side. Sometimes I do this at 350 or 375. Certainly, if I'm juggling a lot of other things in the kitchen, I'll slow that temperature down. I also heard that this oven's a little cooler, so I've kind of got a little above 400 just to sort of make sure we're getting there. So in the oven, what I'm planning to do is check back in on this, maybe after, say, 10 minutes or so. And, you know, at home, I'm familiar with my oven and its temperature and how fast it heats and where there are hot spots in the oven. But I'm not familiar with this one, so I'm going to probably check in a little more often to see what's going on with it. So this method is definitely one of the things where I've seen the variation on oven temperatures within the oven vary and impact the outcome a lot. Where in some ovens, you know, the oven I was doing the other day where I was doing like 6 sheet trays of it, it'd be like this back corner is burning, but the front corner is still underdone. Or what was happening is the top tray in the oven, this was a convection oven, the top, you know, which it moves air around in it, the top tray, the top of the latkes were cooking to crisp, but not the bottom, versus the bottom tray, the bottom of the latkes was cooking all the way, but not the top. So the way you deal with that, and this is probably going to be true of any oven when you're doing it this way, is you're going to want to rotate your trays. So, you know, after, depending on the heat of the oven, 5 to 15 minutes, you're going to want to take your latke tray out, turn it around, and maybe rotate it top to bottom too, if you have multiple trays in there. So that in the end, whatever multiple trays you are, they're going to come out roughly even. After that rotation, in maybe another 15 minutes or so, you're going to then be flipping them. So we'll, you know, if time permits with how this oven works, we may get to that and be able to see that you flip them. There are, you know, I found sometimes if it's a very hot oven, you might almost get a crisp latke without a flip. But oftentimes you're trying to get that top into the oil to sort of crisp it as well.
Someone wants to know, any good suggestions for cleanup of the oven after using this method?
Well, I don't know. I feel like if you're careful with it, it shouldn't impact the oven too much. The only trick I guess I'd say is if you think the oil might be spilling or sputtering, is to put a tray at the bottom of the oven that'll catch those things that fall, catch any oil or drips that you can then take out and it hasn't landed on the oven itself and burnt or smoked.
Yep, and so someone says, do you get more done quicker in the oven than in the frying pans? And yes, we mentioned that earlier. It's a much better way to get more latkes done in a shorter amount of time. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So in professional ovens, like when I'm doing these for an event at the synagogue, in most years, not this year, because we didn't have the Hanukkah celebration this year, or I wasn't involved with it. It wasn't open to the full community. We have to make 1,000+ latkes, and you know, the two approaches are: one, you make them all ahead of time and pre-cook them, and then you're reheating them. But ideally, they're better if you can make them that day. And so we take whole sheet trays like this, and we're making about 25 per sheet tray, and we're just, you know, going through
cycles of baking.
Hundreds of pounds of latkes, and then cycling them to cook them evenly. But yeah, compared to pans, yeah, you just there's no way, even as a professional chef, that I could just manually flip and manage pans the way you can with the oven method.
And someone wants to know if using convection in a normal oven will make it cook more evenly if using multiple trays. I think you mentioned that convection sort of ended up cooking the tops of them a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like convection maybe cooks it faster. I don't find that it's more even. No, I mean maybe it's more even if you're dealing with like 1 or 2 trays, but you know, with a professional size convection oven with like 6 or more full size sheet trays, the convection didn't seem to improve the evenness at all.
Awesome. We are caught up on questions.
Nice,
so
nice.
Sure.
So I am going to just go ahead and do some in a pan because I think we have time, and so we can see that process too.
Head over to the stove. I'll send that camera live again.
Carrie, you take this one or this one's better?
I think either one is fine. Honestly, the one is a little bit closer to the camera, but closer to you and probably easier to reach. Just have to light the pilot light with the skewer. I think that one might be. Whatever feels good to you.
Yeah, so I got a pan started here, and I'm looking to put in enough oil to, I don't know, maybe a 1/4 inch. Again, when I put the latkes in there, it's going to make that oil rise, you know, just by offsetting it.
You're saying blend. You do the blend of the.
Yeah, I did the blend.
Great.
At least I think I did the blend. I meant to do the blend. I don't remember if I actually did. And then I need my spatula. Grab the plate, towels.
Just grabbing an extra plate. Someone says, do you need to flip them in the oven? And yes, we will get to the flipping stage.
Yeah.
In just hopefully a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I flip them in the oven. That's been my experience, is that you're going to get something on both sides. But sometimes I've seen them with convection ovens be cooked on both sides through golden. So, and I feel like I've read of other methods, but I've never done them where you can even, you know, sort of spray your latke with some like ham or, you know, spray oil on the top to get it enough oil so that you can do both sides without flipping. But, so generally, as a rule, with oil, you do want to wait for it to get hot enough that it's sizzling before you put stuff in there. So I do that with the pan. The other thing is sometimes, like, you know, something cold going into the oil might hit the bottom of the pan and stick to it. Versus if it's hot, it's going to start sealing that outside of it. Let's see. Let's say while I'm waiting for that to heat up. I think I've talked about most of the ingredients. So over here, let me see if I can show you this. Yeah, I think I can. So this is the water from earlier that we strained off from the onions and the.
It's already gone brown too.
Yeah, and you can see, yeah, it's turned brown. It's oxidizing. So I poured off the liquid, and now if you see down here at the bottom, there's this stuff. And what this is this is potato starch. That's just come out of the potatoes naturally. So I've read about this as a sort of pro tip on things, is that you can take this starch and add it just right back in. And so you've lost most of the water, but you can retain that starch, which adds for a crispierness to the potato.
Someone commented, I know several people that process the onions and potatoes through a meat grinder.
Oh,
that'll
wow.
give you an even different texture.
Totally. Yeah.
All sorts of options.
Yep.
All right, we'll go back over to the stove, switch cameras for you.
All right. So it looks like it's starting to fry. So while we're here, and I think we're just going to be in sort of a frying and making latke mode, I will try and tell you a little bit about the history of the latke itself. From what I've learned, I have this great book by a man named Gil Marks. It's the Encyclopedia of Jewish Food, I believe, and it's the resource for which a lot of the things I'm telling you came from. I highly recommend it if you want to know more about the sort of history of these food traditions and foods. So where did latkes come? Where did the potato latkes come from? It's another thing I sought to sort of be able to answer as part of my sort of food history background. So as I mentioned, the story of Judith and the story of the Maccabean Revolt sort of in the Middle Ages gets melded together a little bit, even though they weren't in the same time. And in Italy, you see the first recordings of Jewish traditions around eating cheese pancakes, almost this equivalent of a ricotta pancake for Hanukkah, as a Hanukkah specific food. Before that, there is no, based on my research, there's no mention of specific foods related to it as a holiday compared to other Jewish holidays like Passover, which have a very sort of specific food tradition around them. So the pancake, based on the historic scholarly work, the pancake is a thing that you would have encountered in Italy and first encountered in Italy and over into the Middle East, and that then went north into Europe. So this cheese pancake, again, the cheese being another Hanukkah associated food around the story of Judith. And if you can grab me a towel, yeah. So frying these little cheesy pancakes was a Hanukkah tradition. And as it moved north, you began to run into that in Northern Europe, oil was hard to come by there. Olives don't grow in Northern Europe. And so frying and cooking ingredients there, butter is an option, but butter is often expensive or rare, as is flour. So making pancakes, becomes a little more challenging in that way. So, in Northern Europe, Germany, Russia, Ukraine, you would have seen for frying more often animal fats. So in Jewish traditions with kosher rules and laws, obviously lard is not an option. And instead, schmaltz is very often used, which is chicken or goose fat. And so you run into a thing in that case where in kosher eating, you don't mix dairy and meat. That's like a very, very serious rule. To the point, in synagogues, there's usually a set of dishware and cookware for dairy and then one for meat, and the two do not come together. So as these pancake traditions moved north, the cheese sort of became an issue because if your frying oil is fat, you can't fry a cheese pancake in it. And flour also additionally was very expensive or very hard to come by like fine flour. So the pancakes there began to morph a little bit into buckwheat pancakes. And then, so the latke, I can't recall it off the top of my head, but the word itself has an Ukrainian origin, but it originally goes back to a Greek root word that is a Greek root word meaning little oily things, little oily guys. Thank you. The Ukrainian word is Latka, from Aladia, which is little oilies in Greek. I don't know Greek of what era, but the word itself, if you go further back in the etymology, it actually connects to the word oil itself.
Someone wanted to know if you could repeat the reference for the Encyclopedia of Jewish Food, and I can also send it out in an email after class from Richard.
Yeah, absolutely. I have it over there so I can show it to you when I'm not frying. And so in the 1800s, potatoes began being grown across Europe. And over in Russia, Russian territory, they really promoted them as a food because very often wheat or other grains would fail and be very finicky around weather, and potatoes are a little more forgiving about that. And so there was a big boom of the consumption of potato, and that included in the Jewish communities. And so you see potatoes begin appearing. If I remember right, the oldest reference to a latke in this way that we know it is paired with roasted goose, which was also like a Hanukkah tradition at one point in time. And so that would have been potato pancakes fried in goose fat. So later on then, as we know it here in the US, the immigrants who came from that region brought them to here, and they became part of the American food and culture.
It already smells so good in the kitchen. I am so excited to eat these.
So
I wish we had smell-o-vision for everybody who couldn't join us, because it smells really good.
So yeah, cooking them here on the stove, like I said, it's much more controlled. I know exactly what's going on. I'm able to see and say it's cooking a little more over here, a little less over here. I can adjust the temperature up and down. So if you want a controlled, great latke, and you're not making them in mass, or needing to make them quickly, this probably also you spend more time with oil sort of frying and sputtering around your kitchen. So if you want to keep a cleaner kitchen, this is also probably a little bit better to go with the oven. So I'm gonna call it done. The easiest way to tell if they're done is you just cut them open, see what's going on the inside. Depending on the water content and the thickness, that may vary. But I've never really run into that my latkes were undercooked. I feel like they cook pretty fast on the inside. And I like them a little more on the golden side than on the dark crispy side.
If you have any dark and crispy ones, I'll take care of those for you.
Yeah. I'll leave a few extra in
Yeah.
a little bit longer. See what else to say about this.
Do you reuse your frying oil, or do you find that after a batch of latkes it's pretty spent and should be?
I keep using it. The only time I might not do that is if the fire got so hot that if I let it go to the point where the particles inevitably burned, it might give it a burnt flavor. At a certain point with frying oil, if you're working with deep fried stuff, if you're making deep fried foods, young oil or like brand new oil is actually not the best to fry in. And a lot of times restaurants who do frying, they often save a part of their older oil to add into new oil. If you've ever deep fried at all, you might have seen that where you fry it and the first batch is like tough. It never looks like quite golden, but it just gets kind of tough and dried out. And then eventually when oil gets older, it'll do the thing where it browns faster than it cooks. So it'll look golden on the outside, but still be raw on the inside. So yeah. Yeah, similarly, a little like slightly used oil is better than not. But this isn't as much deep frying, so with olive oil, I feel like you can you can usually get a good, yeah, you can get a good fry right out of the first, right from the beginning.
Nice.
Check that.
So we're gonna check our oven ones while we're multitasking. Look at them go. This is the part where I know as a klutz, I would probably spill hot oil all over the floor of my oven.
So I'll show you, this is definitely an oven that is not cooking very fast, although at the beginning, it takes a while for the whole thing just to heat up. So it may pick up speed. Right now, they still look largely raw. And so at this point, like I'm gonna do it just to show you, but I wouldn't try to flip it, but as you go, you can start to look and see what you have on the underside. So it's slightly golden, so it is happening, it's getting there.
Yeah, our ovens are deep rather than tall, so we have one layer of trays and they're relatively close to the heat source. So we do find that the bottoms of things tend to cook a little faster just because that one tray is down near the gas flame. So
I will do a little bit more of this.
yeah, we can watch another demo of the pan frying method. If anybody has questions, feel free to keep typing them in. I'm loving having all these answers. Great. Someone commented, and I'm sorry that I'm probably going to mispronounce the word, but cheese latkes for Shavuot? Shavuot? Is that another Jewish holiday? Something about cheese latkes being a specific.
I guess by Shabbat, it just means the Saturday meal.
It's spelled Shavuoth in their comment. So if you want to type in maybe a clarification on that, I apologize. I'm not sure what that is in reference to, but yeah, cheese latkes sound awesome. I know you had a recipe in your handout, right, for the farmer's cheese sort of pancake idea. So
yeah, and I can see easily incorporating into this a little bit of like grated up cheese, or sorry, not grated cheese like melty style cheese, but like a farmer's cheese, which maybe I'll take a moment to do. Yeah, we probably have time. So I'm trying to make a shreddier one here, so I'm doing less of packing it and more like sort of stacking it in here. Making it a little bit more regular, trying to get those crispy edges.
Yeah, there you go. You have the recipe for the cheese latkes, the cassola with the milk ricotta. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, so with food in general, I just love how throughout history things change and cultures share. That this which has a very deep-rooted tradition in it. I mean, it is also a potato, right, which comes from Peru. It's just amazing how I just love how food and culture move across the country, across the world, and they change, and people adapt to their space and time. I tend to be one who says, like, don't be so rigid with your recipes or believing that you have to make something one way or the other. Invention has always been how humans developed more food, different foods. And I think we'll continue doing that, making new traditions. So invent, experiment. All that.
You're right back to the show in a second, folks. Just wash your hands again. It's a very messy business.
All right, so I have one other demo, which I think we have time to do here, which is something I always want to turn people on to knowing about, which is how to make farm cheese or queso blanco or paneer. So this is the most basic of cheeses. It's curd cheese that's then been sort of pressed into a cheese. So if you see over here, I have 1 gallon of milk that I have put into a double boiler of water. This is a little trick I've discovered over time, that as long as you're careful about it, it doesn't touch the sides, and I have a plate underneath it, so it's not touching the bottom. This is a great way to heat milk without burning into a pot. I find that it's very easy to burn milk if you're trying to heat it to a near boil. Of course, if you have a double boiler setup, meaning like you would have some water and another either jar or pot that sat inside of that water. That's a great way to go about it. And you heat this to a near boil.
So they said they chimed in, Shavuot is a different holiday in the Jewish calendar, a late spring harvest festival of sorts. Thank you for the instruction.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I know that one, or if I've celebrated that one at the temple, but.
I was just gonna Google it and see when it is. 7 weeks after the festival of first fruits. And Diane, I see your question about why he didn't choose to turn them yet. He thought they weren't quite ready to be turned yet, so we're gonna stick them back in our oven and we'll turn them in a little bit. We have a question. They'd love to hear more about the cheese and buckwheat latkes. If you could just chat on that while you're eating them.
Sure. So with that one, with this, I wanted to provide that recipe, but I made it for this class 2 years ago, so I'm a little out of practice with it, to be honest. So that's when I would have to follow up with you if you want to know more.
Yep, and those recipes were in that handout that I emailed out, so definitely check those out, see what you think.
All right, so what I have here is, like I said, 1 gallon of water of milk that I heated to a near boil. And I'm going to go and grab some vinegar. So, Carrie, is there a way to possibly see within this pot?
You're going to have to just tilt it up into the camera. Unfortunately, I'm not able to
do that. Can you see?
Yeah, you can see the milk.
So yeah, farmer's cheese or cheese curds, queso blanco, paneer. I found that a lot of times people are looking for it, or they're, I think it's delicious and it's so easy to make, and I feel like everyone should know about it. It's great for fillings and minces as well. So I'm going to eyeball it. I think I have written down how much you're supposed to put in here. I feel like it's a 1/4 cup per gallon. And all I'm doing is I'm adding vinegar in.
1/4 cup per half gallon, so.
So a half cup. So when I put this in there, I'm not sure if your resolution is good enough to see it, but you'll begin to see the where I poured in the vinegar, that the milk and the whey and the curds are beginning to separate. I'm very gently stirring it, and I'm just going to keep adding more in, waiting. If you're
zooming in on you just a little bit, so hopefully we can. There we go. We got a zoom.
So if you're more patient, you can just add it and wait. I'm being a little impatient, so I'm probably adding more. But what's slowly happening is sort of like little raft of curds are forming in here. That almost look like cottage cheese curds. And I'm doing this very gently with the stirring because I want large curds to form. I don't want to break them up by sort of jarring them too much. And if you can see it now, can you see that differentiation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's that yellowish, it's like almost a yellowy green looking part, and then there's the white curds that are floating. And that is most of it. So if you want to be really fine and you're being more patient than I am, because I'm demonstrating, you would put in smaller amounts and let it sit longer, and the curds would form bigger curds, and it would be a little less acidic. But yeah, after just a couple minutes, that has separated into curds and whey.
Someone wanted to know if you could just bring it to a slow boil without worrying about a double boiler. I mean, you mentioned, you have a lot of trouble scorching it to the pot, but if you were careful about it, would it work?
Yeah, you could be very careful about it. Just my experience is that almost even a good thick pan, you're going to end up with some amount of milk burned at the bottom that you'll have to scrub or scrape off. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things I just don't want to deal with, that dirty pan. And then very easily that if you don't have a very good pan and you're not being careful, it burns a little, and then the milk is ruined and tastes like burnt milk. So yes, it is possible if you are totally honest and paying attention. And you don't actually need to actually get to a boil. That's the other thing. So you just get below boil. So if you hit a boil, you should just turn it right off. And yeah, and I had a little bit of heat under it, but it's not even necessary if you've got the temperature good and you let it sit.
It's 6:45.
Okay. So I think we may not see a lot of the oven results. Let's take a look and see what we got. Those are still working, but I think that I could give some of them a flip. So if you can see here, this is an example, sort of a little bit of an uneven oven where this guy right here definitely looks ready. Flip. Yeah, he's nice and gold there. You can give him a little squish. I mean, it's okay that a lot of the oil has sort of absorbed or isn't there. You'll still get a sort of done latke. So I'm just going to flip them out and see where we're at. So yeah, you see there's some variation underdone there, it's a little overdone there. I didn't sort of skipping the rotations, so rotating may have helped with that.
How you know the chef has got to affect those fingers, just touching all of those things without freaking out.
He's got to touch it really quickly and then move it that way. Yeah, so here, like I said, is seeing that wherever this was in the oven is hotter, and then around there, so it seems like the front middle is not as hot in general. So I could also do rotations like this and move those to the center. Putting those there.
Yeah, I think it's because it heats from the sides, like if the flames are on the sides.
All right, so we'll leave those latkes there. So if you haven't ever had latkes, traditionally what you want to then put on these is sour cream and applesauce. Those are the classic sides of these. I always say to people you should really make your own applesauce. It's so much better. It's just simply apples and you puree them. You know, you don't even really need to add sweeteners necessarily. You can roast them or add spices. Leave the skins on, in my opinion, add more flavor. I'm going to strain this. I'm trying to figure out a way to do this without this.
Great, so we're getting set up to strain out the farmer's cheese, so we'll be right back.
Yeah, strainer that up, put on top of this. Perfect.
We just put together our straining, and we're going to move back over to the stove.
So if you lay the curd set up really well, you could just put it right into the strainer and not worry about cheesecloth, which I have right here. And it would, it may even be firm enough now, but depending on how small the curds are, it may go through. So that would work. I could do that. I'm getting some through, but I'm going to use the cheesecloth. I can show you the shaping. So again, this is cheesecloth, but you could use a t-shirt or any clean cloth that doesn't smell like laundry detergent and doesn't give off too much, fuzzies or anything. All right, so the curds in the way. You can see the water is just pouring out of it.
I keep having to zoom in and out so we can see what you're doing, but then also see your head, because you're so tall that when I zoom in on what you're doing, there you go. No, don't do that. That's just gonna hurt.
You need taller ugly. All right, so again, if I wasn't in a hurry, I would probably just let this sit and drain on its own, but I'm trying to get it towards finished in time. So I'm twisting it and I'm pressing on it with a spatula that is handy. But if you let it cool a little bit, you can do this by hand. And then depending on what you want to use it for, you could stop right here. and you have sort of a fluffier curd, like, almost like a ricotta. But if you want something more like paneer or queso blanco, you can keep pressing it to get more water out, and it'll become increasingly firm. Use a more steady spatula.
That poor spatula. Gone through a lot. We had someone ask, the recipe says white vinegar and you use apple cider. Is there any difference?
Yeah, I usually use white vinegar because it's neutral. I feel like apple cider has a little bit of apple cideriness to it. But you can use, and I think this is more traditional with paneer, is to use lemon juice or any vinegar. Well, I'm sorry, not any vinegar. You wouldn't want to use like balsamic vinegar. Sorry, any sort of neutral vinegar. Red wine could work in a pinch. But yeah, I don't think you want to taste the vinegar that much. You just want it to do the process that it does, which is curdling.
Mostly we used apple cider because it was in the kitchen already, but
yeah.
Yep. And someone also asked, is the sour cream that you serve your latkes with seasoned or just plain sour cream?
Just plain sour cream. You can do things like if you want to get fancy, you could I might zest like lime juice, lime zest or some lime juice into it, or add a little salt. But I think plain is good. Also, you could do creme fraiche if you wanted to.
Vermont Creamery makes an awesome creme fraiche that I will attest is great with latkes.
All right. And I'm gonna more or less call that done. So if you do this longer, you will actually get a loaf, like it will be firm and stuck together that you could slice or cut into cubes to do paneer with. All right, and I think that covers most of everything I have.
Yeah, so we're gonna finish up the batch of latkes that's on the stove, and we're gonna check on the ones in the oven, but it looks like they might not be done in time. We have about 10 minutes for questions, so if people have any further questions, feel free to type those into the chat. Any further just comments or suggestions on the holiday? Like we mentioned, we'd love to hear other people's traditions and thoughts around this. So we'll have the floor open for a few more minutes to finish up, but otherwise, thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah, I was going to throw in, I think it's one of the things I didn't mention is that they're, frying is sort of the theme to some degree. And if you look, there are Jewish communities almost everywhere in the world, and there are great resources out there to find, what their traditions are. And so, if you go to, Ethiopia, you can do sambusas, the deep fried and stuffed pastries, or, of course, sukeneyo is another very famous one, which is a donut, essentially, a filled donut. I've included a recipe for a Greek-style donut in there that I make often. It's really delicious. They're very easy to make. The dough is very forgiving, and you drop it in a deep fryer. You fry it, you just spoonfuls, and it makes a sort of irregular donut rounds. And then you make this great sugar honey mixture with rose water that you throw on them while they're hot. It's just sort of like sticky, oily, sweet, and delicious.
Somebody wants to know how long the fresh cheese will last in the fridge if you don't use it right away.
I think it freezes okay if you needed to serve it for longer. Otherwise, I think maybe 4 or 5 days. It's definitely not any kind of a preserved cheese that would last extensively, but your nose will tell you pretty quickly if it's not good anymore.
Yeah, and someone else wanted to know how you would serve the cheese. And I know that the recipe you have is used then in that cheese pancake recipe, but could you also do other things with it?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of times I like to just cut it into cubes, bread it, and deep fry it. It's really delicious. Obviously, it goes into saag paneer or any paneer-related Indian dishes. You can crumble it up and just use it, I don't know, in maybe even in salads or anything. You could use it as when you're making stuffing for the cheese, anywhere where ricotta would go. So like in lasagna, yeah.
I like to make fresh cheese, and it's really good as a spread. Like if you mix a bunch of herbs and garlic, a little bit of oil in there, on like crackers and stuff. Yeah, really good veggies.
Yeah, I've also done this thing. I forget what the tradition is. I'm not recalling, but where you take the fresh cheese and you mix it, you break it up with garlic and herbs and a bit of yogurt in there, and you end up with this really flavorful, delicious dip spread kind of thing.
If you want to add salt to the cheese, when would you do that and what kind of salt would you recommend? So would you salt the milk? Would you salt after?
Well, I found that I know I have tried to pour the salt in the milk and it messed up the process. I don't have a great answer on the science of that, but I don't salt it. I would salt it later.
All right, any further questions? I'll leave it up for about another 2 minutes if we have any other questions. I'm going to switch camera views real quick to myself. 1 second. All right, so again, thank you all so much for attending tonight. It was really great to, again, have this sort of sense of community, even though we're not able to gather together in person. I will be sending a class survey out through email tomorrow, so I'd love to know your thoughts on the class. And other than that, I will just sign off and say goodbye. I hope everybody has a great night, a great weekend, and a great holiday season. Thank you all so much.
And goodbye from me as well. Nice to meet you virtually. Feel free to follow up through Carrie if you have any questions about anything I told you tonight. Cheers.